Writers, agents, and publishers, for the first time since the Gutenberg Press, find themselves lost in a maze of mystery as technology alters the shape of the publishing industry. Searching for Answers is a group of writers throwing pop culture, writing, and publishing into a crucible of clarity, passion, and humor. This group is the Right Pack. In this episode, we are going to talk about suspense, the thrill of suspense. Welcome back to Right Pack Radio. This is your host and producer, David Allen Lucas, author of Crazy Things, president of St. Louis Writers Guild, president of Winding Trails Media, and I guess chairman of Gateway Con. Hey, come to St. Louis for a great Gateway Con convention and conference and everything else, and I'm just talking. Sorry, I haven't had enough coffee today, so I'm going to kick this over to, by the way, voice actor. Kicking this now over to my Madame of Murder herself.
Fedora Amos. I write Victorian whodunits like Jack the Ripper in St. Louis and Mayhem at Buffalo Bill's Wild West. And I am president of Greater St. Louis Sisters in Crime.
I am George Soroy. I'm the president of the Missouri Writers Guild. I write science fiction for the young adult reader. My novel Excelsior is available in audiobook, narrated by myself, ebook and paperback, and the 5-part serial from Parts Unknown is currently available on ebook as 5 separate ebooks and paperback as 2 volumes. And you can find out more about myself and my fun, crazy antics at my website at he'sgotit.com.
I am Brian R. Cook, author of several things, actually. Mostly in the historical fantasy range, like steampunk, as in the Iron Chronicles. Check them out. The Iron Horseman, Iron Zulu, and Iron Lotus. But I lack a brain mostly at the moment because I am currently getting ready to push my next series out the door. The first of which is Steam Tree. Do check it out because by the time you're listening to this, it's already out in the world. Yay! So do be on the lookout for it. You will find it online at bradarcook.com.
And that's a middle grade, is it?
Yes, it is a middle grade steampunk adventure. It's more fantasy, I'd say, because it's dragons and airships and all the fun that those two can have.
The Christmas present.
Exactly.
I'm Melanie Lucas, and the suspense of this one is going to be, can I stay awake? But, I'm not driving at the moment, so falling asleep at the wheel, falling asleep at the radio table, not nearly as suspenseful. So I am, sorry.
So suspense is how many of us are going to make it to the end?
Yes, that's it.
It's like 12
It'll be like Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Exactly.
Who will survive and what will be left of them?
Yeah, sorry. This is called The Weather's Change, and all of us are feeling slightly ill for various reasons.
Hey, I'm finally breathing okay again.
Yay!
Here's the frost.
Yes. Okay, well today, if you didn't catch it, we're going to talk about the thrill of suspense. And I'm going to start off by throwing out a question because, like, when we talk about fantasy and science fiction, they're shelved in the same area of almost every bookstore. So is mystery and the thriller, suspense. They're shelved. But is there a difference between mystery and suspense? And loaded question, that answer is yes. But what are some of the differences?
Well, I'd like to give you Eileen Dreyer's definition of suspense. Eileen has written a number of medical thrillers and a lot of other things as well, plain mysteries, romantic suspense, you name it. So she knows a lot about suspense, and this is what she says. The craft of suspense is the art of making your audience find it unbearable not to know what's going to happen next. And I might add, and keep them in that state.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Alfred Hitchcock once had a description of this. I can't really tell you about what he described mystery, but mystery was basically, to him, was something you're trying to solve, you're trying to figure it out, and to him was extremely boring. But suspense was, you show the audience the gun. You show the audience the characters who may not know about the gun. Then you show the audience more on the gun. And you keep building that suspense because the audience knows something that the characters don't. And they're going, don't let it happen!
Yeah, I think he said it. I think the best way that he phrased it was that you have a character with a bomb under their chair,
That's another way to do it. Yes.
and it only works if everyone knows that it's there except the person sitting in the chair.
Right.
And that played out to a masterful effect in the original Psycho, because you see Marion Crane in the shower, and she's just lost in her own thoughts and everything, and then you just see someone as quiet as can be. You can listen to you can, if you're just listening to the scene play out, you don't hear a door opening, you don't hear any footsteps. All you see is a shadow walking into the frame, and then getting closer and closer and closer, and all you hear is just the water running. And then as soon as she pulls back the curtain, that's when you get the violins going.
The
Go ahead.
screeches are
Yes.
just unbearable.
They are unbearable, and something I'm going to talk about that in a minute. Go
So is
ahead.
this the difference between suspense and horror then? So in horror, the character would know the man with the knife is coming.
Well, no,
Okay.
Not really.
not really. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, really, when it comes to horror, what horror does is it plays on our own fears.
Okay.
That's we're all afraid of
So
dying.
does suspense.
And so
Yeah,
it
suspense
does.
does
Well,
too.
I
But
was
horror kind of plays it out all the way through.
I was just thinking though, similar scene, except instead of someone just taking a shower oblivious, they're hiding in the bathroom from the guy coming through the house, and the suspense, they know that there's a guy in the house. The issue is, will the guy in the house find them? So we know, and the potential victim know the exact same thing.
Yeah, basically,
So that's different than
until it happens, as the scene plays itself out, and that in both ways, whether they're oblivious to it or whether they're fully aware of what's going on, you have that element of suspense. As soon as the moment itself happens, then it stops being suspense and it starts being horror,
Right.
because then you have the actual moment playing out in front of you.
Exactly. Let me use an example. Let me use Psycho as an example. Psycho is a great example of really walking that razor's edge, because Psycho technically was a horror, but really was a suspense thriller.
Yeah.
And let's take that very shower scene, the famous shower scene. I know Brad knows this answer because he's read my old Writer's Lens episode on this. I think, maybe, possibly. He's looking at me like, no, hell no, I did not read what you wrote. But, okay, let's take a slasher type movie, but you're using that same shower scene. You would see the knife going into the victim, probably multiple times. In the movie, right, and blood going all over the place. Lots of blood splatter. Maybe not even accurate blood splatter.
Oh, highly inaccurate blood splatter. Let's be serious.
Yeah, I know. I was trying to be nice, which is rare for me. Now I go back to Psycho, that main shower scene. How many times do you see the knife? Do you, the audience, see the knife enter the victim? Survey says zero. Never does it go into her. You see,
You hear it.
You hear it. You hear it. You see the knife. You see her scream. You see what.
Well, you really see the knife at the top.
You
and
see
then
the knife at
plunges
the top.
down out of camera and plunges back up and then
Right.
goes back. And that's what you're seeing.
Right.
And what are, God, I can't even remember how many. It's 80
something.
There's a number he has of the number of pieces of film.
Yeah.
Because it's the old editing style. It's not modern editing.
Yeah.
So
Right.
it's just cut film put together. And it's some crazy number of actual different pieces of film that make up that scene.
Right.
Because he's cutting and pasting all these different scenes of, the knife coming up and down, the curtain being pulled,
Yeah. And
the water swirling.
he's having to do a lot of cutting pasting because in one scene it's the actor who's playing Norman Bates doing it. In
Tony
another
Perkins.
scene, which is cut, is where it's actually being filmed with. Just
Janet
forgot
Leigh.
her name.
Janet Leigh.
Thank you, Janet Leigh, and it's actually Hitchcock with knives. So,
Yes.
it's a completely different thing, and yeah, that is probably one of the greatest suspense elements right there. Let's go to the other side of it. Oh, go ahead,
Well,
Fedora.
this is a nice little article. which was from romance writers, called Basic Elements in Suspense Writing by Beth Mance. And she says, someone runs and locks the door just as the handle starts to turn. Seconds later, the lights go out, plunging the room into darkness. Frightened screams echo off the walls. That's suspense. With suspense, there's a slow building of each element until the person reading the book starts yelling at the character in the book to do something. Get out of there. Don't go in there. Stop. Save yourself. That's suspense. It is knowing what's going to happen, but the character doesn't.
I always think of it as the pause before the action.
Yeah.
Because
I
there's
think
an
there's
action
more
that's
to
about
it
to
than
take
that.
place.
Because
And
the
there's this
expectations have to be
moment-
built.
They do, but
They
there's
do.
that moment before, and that's where you build all your suspense. Because
No, a
it's that
suspense should be
stretching
built
out
long
moment.
before that and going up to this action moment. I mean, I agree there's an action moment, but the suspense has to start long before that.
Well, there has to be points of suspense. You can have, okay, we did the shower scene. That's a single scene in Psycho. But if you look at the movie Psycho, and I can talk about this with North by Northwest, you can talk about this with Rope.
I think Rope is a better example of suspense than Psycho.
I agree. I'll go with that. But I'm just thinking of all the different
Rear Window.
Thank you. I couldn't get. I had The Man Who Knew Too Much and Rear Window getting intermixed title-wise.
Yeah.
And it's like The Man Who Knew the Rear Window. What? But you had all those moments of suspense building. Actually, let me use Rear Window as an example. Okay. You have in Rear Window, the main character is in a wheelchair. He's got a busted leg. Old-fashioned, you don't get a splint back then, you got plaster. And he's watching out his rear window because he's completely, totally bored. Today, if that movie was done correctly, as it's been multiple attempts to remake it, and they try to remake it like the original movie, no, it'd be somehow you're watching this on social media instead of out your rear window. But you were
It'll never happen. We have cell phones.
I
We'll just
know,
be
we
playing
do.
on our phones.
Yeah.
throughout
Yeah, I
all the
know.
time. And air conditioning, so it doesn't matter anymore.
Society's
Yeah, air
changed.
conditioning would make a lot of difference.
Yeah. Anyway, he's become a voyeur into watching other people's lives, and he notices a salesman across the way kills his wife, but he actually doesn't see the murder. He knows the nagging wife has suddenly disappeared. Well, that becomes a question of what's going on. Where's she at now? The bed's all rolled up. There's various things that the guy is doing, like he's smoking. Sorry, the bad guy is smoking alone in the dark, stuff like that. Then a little yappy dog starts digging around the garden, and suddenly the yappy dog is killed in another scene. Then you've got his girlfriend, the hero's girlfriend, goes and breaks into the guy's house or guy's apartment, and then she gets cornered and caught by the bad guy. And you get the building of suspense, and I'm not going to go into it any further because I don't want to. Yes, the movie's been out for quite a few decades. I don't want to ruin it as a suspense for you. But I think that's one thing. I think that with a good suspense, you don't. If you're going for a long game, a novel, or something more than just a couple-page short story, anyway, you're going from scene to scene to scene, and each scene is building that suspense on up to the ultimate point of possibly the hero dying or the hero succeeding, and you don't know if there's going to be a final happy ever after ending or not. Take North by Northwest, where the hero is at the end dangling off of Mount Rushmore, and he's about to lose his grip as the bad guys are there. I'm not going to tell you how it ends, but it gives you an idea. Mm-hmm. So what are some things not to do in suspense? Alfred Hitchcock hit one big time. He admits it.
Can I say, because I actually know this one?
Oh, go for it. What's the one that his audience always hated him for?
He, not to say what he literally did, but what he did, metaphorically, was he killed the cat.
Please keep going.
Okay, so what you do is he had this suspense. This little kid was carrying a bomb.
And the little kid didn't know it.
Yeah, of course the little kid didn't know it. And the little kid got on a bus, and he was sitting next to an old lady with a cute little dog on it. And of course he was dawdling, so he was supposed to deliver this package somewhere, but he was taking too long. So if this was a right way of doing suspense where the audience would forgive you, the little kid would survive. Guess what? The bomb went off.
Yeah.
He killed the cat. Never kill the cat.
That's true. That's definitely one thing. That's
Unless
something-
it's horror, then you can kill the cat.
And even that, even that, you're really kind of, towing the line, if you do that. That happened in the second Alien versus Predator movie, especially in the unrated version, where we not only got to see a facehugger attach itself to a child, but we also got to see the chest burster, occur. So there's a reason why that part only survives in the unrated version. It's because they at least had the good sense to take that out of the version that would be in theaters. Of course, there was a lot more that they should have taken out in that, but
like the beginning and through the end.
pretty much, yeah. Pretty much the whole thing. Yeah.
I don't remember. I was reading a book about writing, so I don't remember what the author was, but it was there was literally a cute, fluffy pet animal, and this was a mystery where a lot of people were murdered. And the cat was killed off scene. It was just reported that the cat died. And that author never got any complaint letters about any of the people that were murdered in the book, but they got so many complaints about that cat dying.
Yeah, you can kill millions and millions of people, just don't kill a pet. Go ahead.
A couple of techniques of suspense writing. First is time. Make sure that the time unit is short. There is a deadline. You're always racing against the clock. Take the series 24.
Perfect.
For
Yeah,
example.
you went exactly where my mind was going to say. Go for it.
So that is one thing. Keep it all very short in a time frame and racing against the clock. That always will create some degree of suspense. And a second technique is to figure out what the reader wants to know and don't give it to them. At any given point in the story, you could tell everybody everything. That is the opposite of suspense. You construct your chapters to reveal only what the reader must know in order to get to want to know more. If that makes any sense to you, that is what suspense is. Each time one question is answered, one little thing is discovered, one little thing is completed, that must bring in another question for you to follow, another place to go, another hint, another clue, another something that will keep the reader wanting to know. Because it's the wanting to know that is the suspense.
If I can borrow from, oh crap, my mind just went blank. Oh, God. Who's the one who wrote TV scripts for major TV scripts, including Rockford Files, A-Team?
Cannell?
Thank you.
Stephen J. Cannell.
Stephen J. Cannell. I apologize to his legacy. I am sorry. He was, if you ever get a chance to watch a video called Write Along, I believe is what it's called. It is with Nathan Fillion, who was at the time playing Castle, and he was following along with Stephen J. Cannell about writing, how to be a mystery writer, because that's what Nathan Fillion's character was. And I realize I'm jumping from suspense to mystery when I talk about this. But in one point of this video, and there's a lot of good stuff on that video, but one point of this video, he asks Nathan what he wants to drink. And it says something along the lines of, do you want it with a slice or a twist? And Nathan goes with a slice. And Stephen goes, that's wrong. When you're thinking like a mystery writer, or in this case, a suspense writer, you're always going for the twist. The twist and the turn. And speaking of suspense, we were unsure if he could attend or not, but yes, we have the one and only Ryan.
I am here. I'm here. I'm sorry. I'm here.
However, we missed it because we
I'm
should
waving.
have
You can't
announced
see.
it from the beginning, so the audience could have been waiting this whole time.
Yes, this is true.
See,
That
now
would
we
be
have
suspenseful.
the jump scare, which
Yes.
is something that that
It's
I was
not
actually kind
suspense.
of against, but I am not against Ryan being here. So hello, Ryan.
Hello, Ryan.
Hello.
So we're
So
talking about
there's something on
suspense.
how not to be suspenseful. Don't just drop it in.
Yes.
You got to lead into it.
That's the nice thing about Writer, though. You can go back and edit before it comes out.
Exactly.
Well, okay, let me go with that. Let me go with that question real fast.
So you're going to go back to the beginning.
So
and
we're
be
gonna,
like,
No,
we're
no,
gonna
no,
just
no, no.
interject a little,
Fedora was just sharing some comments about suspense, or how to write suspense. So my question to everybody here: when you're writing either suspense into your story, because you may not write suspense as your main feature, or when you are writing a suspense story, do you put that into the plot, or do you write it and then you go back and you fill in the foreshadowing of the suspense that's to come? What do you guys do? Let's go around the room. And Ryan, you want to go first with that? You kind of waved at me, so.
So when I go into like suspense and foreshadowing,
Yes.
okay. Well, I tend to have thriller aspects in my fantasies that I write. Some of it is organic because I'm a pantser, but it's almost like I'm cueing and prepping myself as I write. What a reader will see as foreshadowing, or like lining something up. You can tell. For me, it's almost like a mental note to pick up on that plot line later.
Okay. So do you go back and you put in those elements then?
Yeah, because when I'm going back through and I'm checking for continuity, I make sure that those are each woven in and tied up.
Okay. Fedora, what about you? You're a plotter.
Well, no, actually, I'm a pantser, but
Oh, okay.
I have a few things in mind before I actually start off. And so I do have to go back, and I have to include some red herrings, and I also have to include some clues once I find out who the bad guys are. Because I don't necessarily know that at the beginning. I create characters, and they go kind of their own way very often. And sometimes I have to go back and make them a little more sinister or a little less sinister, something that will put them more into the track of where I'm actually going to end up with the novel. But foreshadowing is certainly a very important part. And I have some methods for foreshadowing that I'll share as soon as you get around the room.
For me, I think of the structure that I used for both Excelsior and Ever Upward, and I hope to use the same for Greater Glory because it seems to be very effective. But I really enjoy the whole ticking clock scenario. I really like the fact that that someone or something is kind of growing in power, and it's up to my main characters and everything to be prepared for that moment to finally happen and to really kind of stop it as soon as it happens. That was the case in Excelsior, where we learned that that the character Danak is in process of being regenerated on Earth, and our main character Matthew Peters is not ready to become Excelsior. So it's basically like kind of up to the characters and everything to get him ready so that once Danak regenerates, then he'll be able to face him. And so that part of it was something that I always just kind of like kept on going back to as it was going. It's just like he was getting more regenerated. Now he's more regenerated. Now he's actually waking up and he's still not ready. So what's going to happen next? That element was a whole lot of fun when I was putting that together.
Cool. Brad, what about you?
In terms of foreshadowing, I'm going to touch on that first. So I put in two different types of foreshadowing. The first being the type you'll get in the initial read-through, and the second type being the type you're probably going to get if you read through again. Because foreshadowing is important. You have to set up the scenes that are going to be coming later, especially the important ones, the ones that are going to be characters making the turn, the characters doing something important in the story, main plot. If you can allude to what's coming, then you're going to, present a more rounded story. In Iron Lotus, there's a whole thing at the beginning of the book that directly relates to the climax. It's a whole, thing. That is very much, when you read it, you kind of get that sense. When you hit the climax of the book, it is very obvious that you read this whole scene in the beginning for just this moment. And that's but then there's the other side of it, which is things that I have put in there that when you read through the first time are innocuous details that mean absolutely nothing to you. But when you read it the second time, you're like, oh, that's why that character did it that way as opposed to another way, or something along those lines. And in doing that, you really kind of set up different suspense levels. And the first being obvious, the very, open and obvious sense of suspense, which is, it is the long, kind of build up to the, climactic scene. The other one is then something that's a little bit different, which is more something for the reader to kind of experience as they come back through. So
Now, when you being the plotter, you're not the only. I thought we had one other plotter in here, which I apologize to Fedora. Besides my wife, who does plot, we haven't gotten to you yet. Good save, David. Will he survive tonight? No. Do you put that? How much of your foreshadowing do you put into your plot?
most of it.
Most of it?
Yeah.
Okay. And how so, if I can ask?
No, just so you've heard me talk about my plots before. They're bullet pointed things of each chapter. So each chapter, I know what's going to happen. Once I get to the point of seeing the plot line and that I want, it's about knowing where and about I want to fit certain details. For Steam Tree, there is a whole section that you read about that later on you'll probably figure out that has a lot to do with the reasons and the whys in the world. But it's fed to you in certain ways. So I know each of those points where you're going to get fed these clues, just like a mystery. You would in a mystery. And then I do it that way. So they're subplots. It's just part of the subplots that I deal with. Same thing with keeping track of my themes, so that I make sure to touch on the things that I want to touch on in that book.
I'm going to come back to you with a question because I'm curious. We're going with series, but I'm going to let Melanie go now, and then we'll throw out a question for you both. Both being plotters, which I know, Melanie, you haven't completed a series yet, but this will come into this question. So go for it.
Yeah, the reason why I'm stuck right now, aside from not having time to devote to it, is because I got through it and I realized what I called the pacing was terrible, which was part of it, but also the suspense wasn't there. So the answer is, I tried to put it in to begin with, and I realized I missed the mark. So while all the elements were there, and the goal is to put it there in the beginning, once you read through it, you can tell when it's missing. And the issue is, you have the wrong details in, something is wrong, because the goal when I'm done is to have a slow build-up of tension. And I think the problem is I'm trying to write a book in a genre that's not my favorite to read. And which is kind of strange.
Yeah, you did that as a challenge to yourself.
Yeah, but parts of it I really like. I like parts of the genre very well. The issue is my main character is 18, and I'm realizing I like my characters older than that. And the reason is what 18-year-olds consider important are not so much what I consider important. And teenagers, everything is fresh and new, and everything is kind of in the over the top. And basically, I'm having a hard time with the genre conventions, which is something else that I'm kind of having trouble with. For example, if you're having a first-person point of view story, how can you really have any suspense about your main character? Because you're never going to kill your point of view character.
Well,
but
Actually, there are books where they kill off the point of view character.
yeah, but it depends on your genre. But yes.
okay, let me ask this question, and this is going to go to Fedora's opening with foreshadowing in a moment. I'm going to ask everybody in here who has done a series successfully, who is both plotter, that's Brad, Panther, George. No,
I'm a hybrid.
you're a hybrid.
Yeah.
Panther then to Fedora and Ryan being a Panther. Have you ever put foreshadowing in, say, I'm going, too bad Jennifer's not here. She'd love my question because this would relate right to Babylon 5 if you ever watched the series. Babylon 5, things are happening in season 1 are finally being tied up in season 5.
In the pilot.
And from the pilot itself. So
Don't give things away. I'm watching it right now.
I'm not going to tell you what they are. But here's the question. Do you, in your plotting method for Brad and for George as your hybrid, put stuff in your plots that are in book 1 that foreshadow things that are going to happen in book 2, 3, 10, however far down the line? Whichever one you, and then I would kick that over to Panthers.
Yeah, I definitely do. I think it's a lot of fun to do that. Like in terms of how you use it. There's something that I introduce. I'm not going to go into too many details on Ever Upward because that's currently in editing and no one's read that outside of myself and my team. But not even my wife has read it yet. But there is an element that's fairly early on in the story, a weapon actually that is given specifically as like a gift, just as like a decoration, that winds up coming into play in a really, really big way at the very end. And that's all I'm going to say about that. But I had a lot of fun doing that because of what it meant to put that particular item together as a gift. Mm-hmm. What it represented, what it was made of, the message behind it, and basically playing all of that came into play at the very end in what I believe, and my editors seem to agree with me. So I will say that yes, I pulled this off in a very satisfying way.
What about you, Brad? You finished the trilogy, yes. The Iron Chronicles.
The Iron Chronicles.
And I know that trilogy was well planned out. So, what about you?
It was a mix actually of being well planned out and going, that sounds like fun.
Serendipity.
Exactly. No, serendipity played a huge part. So, yes, there were things about the books. There are 3 books that were planned out entirely. So I knew when writing the first book that this was going to play out. A great example of that is Queen Victoria. So in the very first book, he assumes that he is going to get to meet the Queen because he's done some really cool things and his dad's kind of important and he's involved with this secret society, and he gets pretty quickly told, no, the Queen doesn't really see you. Your type. And that then becomes a running gag, which then, at the end, and I don't even mind spoiling this, at the very end of Iron Lotus, the 3rd book, you actually finally get to meet the Queen. Nice. And that was completely planned from day one. I knew that in book 1 and book 2, I was going to play with the fact that he wanted to meet the Queen. He thinks he's going to get to meet the Queen, and then no, you don't get to meet the Queen. That doesn't happen. She'll read about you, she'll hear about you, but no. You don't get to meet her. So there are things like that I planned. There are things that I planned to do in book 1 and book 2 when I was writing them and stuff like that. That when it came time to do it, so there is a bad guy amongst the good guys, and in book 1, I knew I was going to do this, but by book 3. I had no idea it was the person who actually ends up being the mole and the bad guy. I did not know that. That came later, and it was a serendipitous thing. It worked too perfectly. It worked so beautifully, you'd think I planned it. And I kind of did, but really it just was, I knew there were some people who were bad, And it was about figuring out exactly who, and in the end, it was like, oh, the characters had kind of worked that out on their own. And then there's some, and I've fully mentioned that the giant overall arcing plot of the entire trilogy came to me late one night while I was watching History Channel, really at like 2 a.m. in the morning, right when I was working on the edits for the first book. Was sitting there at 2 a.m. working, and this thing comes on the History Channel, and it was literally the opus of my entire, trilogy. It was like laid out in front of me. It worked too beautifully. So I knew that then moving forward and could write towards that. So yes, there are definitely things that I put into my books that you weren't going to find out. And then there are things that I learned along the way, I guess you could say. And I would throw out on that too, my favorite of these is George R.R. Martin with the R plus L equals J. And I'm not going to go into that because it's a whole theory, and if you haven't explored it yet, this went 20 years with speculation. So 20 years of people wondering if this was true, and then in the last season of the show, it got confirmed. So, I mean, that is one of the biggest build-ups I think I've ever seen. And then to drop it on just millions of us all watching at the same time was kind of an experience and kind of crazy and everything like that. But that is how you can, do some of that really long-term stuff truly wonderfully.
Okay. And either Ryan or Fedora, what do you do as far as a pantser? Do you build any type of suspense between various different novels or elements?
Absolutely. But what mine comes from is repetition of characters, because I use the same characters, and this book may be devoted more to one and their character development throughout. And there's some bad guys that are going to come back and some good guys that are come back. And it comes more out of character than of anything else. And by the way, that is an important means of creating suspense, by what happens to characters that people care about. Because if people don't care about the character, there isn't really important suspense going on anyway.
True. Oh, gee, a building got dropped on the guy. Oh, well, moving on. What's happening with the dog? Ryan, what about you?
Well, since I write in a fantasy multiverse, the answer is yes. I like the idea of, if a major event happens somewhere in history, so long as you're past that point, everybody knows about it. If you're dealing with a couple of characters that are immortal, well, they're going to stick around. You're probably going to see them a while later. And so they're going to have history, they're going to have inside references, they're going to have enemies, they're going to have allies, they're going to have relationships. And so, quite naturally, I think it happens all over the place. But also, I like to specifically drop secrets into my books that you're only going to catch if you're really paying attention. Because what I love, as an author, when someone comes up and say, hey, that one part, did it really mean this? And I was like, no, exactly. And that's just something I do because I get a personal kick out of it. So yes.
Okay. And now what we've been waiting for, the foreshadowing. How do we
Some techniques for foreshadowing. Well, one that I think a lot of you can get a lot of mileage out of is the weather, because you can use the weather to create moods, and it's equally true in a book as in a film. If you have rain, if you have people with umbrellas and hurrying, that creates a different mood, a different atmosphere that would be more suitable to suspense than a sunny day, perhaps. Second is one that's, oh, goodness, the cat is scratching up the furniture.
Fortunately enough, he doesn't have any claws. Go
Well,
He's just being weird.
Second is to refer to things when you need information, and you get it by just drips and drabs. a journal, for example, that's in a foreign language and you have to get it translated, or it's in code and you have to get it decoded bit by bit by bit, will allow you to slip in just a little bit, and that will create another question, slip in more, another question. That is a good one. If all else fails, go to a psychic. A lot of the police procedurals do this,
Yes.
because when they can't think of a way to get a clue, anything else on this guy, well, let's have a psychic come in and tell us what we need to know.
In fantasy, that would be the prophecy.
Yeah.
Exactly. How about some kind of paranormal experience, or pseudo paranormal, which really is not paranormal, it just looks paranormal? That is a good one too. Kind of slip that in.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, a lot of great writers use dreams.
That's true.
Yep.
So those are some key means of foreshadowing that are very useful. Keep
Hey.
them in your toolkit.
One of my
Jordan
favorite
Bright.
examples of one of those techniques that Fedora just said regarding a journal is the Diary of Abraham Van Helsing that was used in the Monster Squad. Since it was written in German, so you have that element. So you have to get the character, scary German guy, to go ahead and translate it. Then he finds out that you need a virgin to properly read like a certain amount of text to open up the portal to send Dracula and his minions back into limbo. And then you find out that the person that you've been like forcing this German out of them turns out that they are not a real virgin, and so they have to go ahead and find a different person in order to get it. So you have the foreshadowing, and then you have the added suspense on top of that when it turns out that the original technique of getting what you need to happen doesn't work. And then you have to go in a completely different direction. So, like that's one of my personal favorite uses of those techniques.
Brad?
In the Iron Chronicles, I use all of those actually. So I've got the journals, I've got the dreams, I've got the prophecies.
You have someone who needs to read
No
by a
psychics.
virgin?
Not technically, but yes. So yeah, you can use all of those techniques actually. But this is what I was going to throw out, and this is where a lot of suspense, but more importantly, foreshadowing, I think, comes in, is getting the reader to ask a question about your story. And then either answering that question, which is a payoff for the end of your book, or not answering that question, which then draws them along through your entire series.
Cliffhanger.
Exactly. I am a huge fan of the cliffhanger. It's one of those we're about to bring up, which is ending your chapters on cliffhangers. The reason being so that the person wants to jump to the next chapter and start reading and keep reading. But cliffhangers are a great way of creating suspense.
Okay. Ryan?
I don't know if you guys have touched on it yet or not, but I think one of the best masterful uses of foreshadowing and suspense that I've read is in the Harry Potter series.
Nope.
Didn't talk about that one.
Didn't talk about Harry Potter, please do.
Okay, well,
Rock our wizard
if
world.
you haven't read it yet, okay, I would say spoilers, but you've had your chance. You read it through once, and you're like, oh, this is good, and you read it through again, and you're like, oh my gosh. And you read it through again, and you start, I feel like each time I read it through, I catch more and more nuances, more and more foreshadowing, more and more details that she worked in that's everywhere. It is incredible. And if you haven't already you read it again, read the series again now that you know what happens. And the sheer staggering amount of details of foreshadowing and consistency is amazing.
Could you give us some examples?
Snape.
Let me.
Yes,
Okay.
maybe.
Well, like when Harry goes in first time to get his wand in Ollivander's,
Yeah.
Mr. Ollivander is talking about the other people's wands that he's sold, and he talks about like his mom's wand being really like swishy, good for charms work, and because she gave Harry the charm that helped save his life. And then he talks about like Voldemort's wand and it's like unyielding, you know. And the different people's wands all have to do with real big events. That's one example I can think of off the top of my head.
Okay. Fedora.
I would like to talk about markets for a moment. And since all suspense is based upon fear,
Yeah.
it behooves you, if you want to write suspense, I think, to consider what the greatest fears of people at large are. And those sometimes change. So you need to keep somewhat up to date. There was an interesting article in the paper today, which was about what Americans are afraid of. And they had a study by Chapman University that has done this annually, and they have a questionnaire with 70 items that people might be afraid of, and they ask people to list the things that they're afraid of. And so if you are trying to market something right now, playing into these worst fears would be a very good thing. What is at the very top of the list this time? Do anybody want to take a guess? Is it what the top fear of people was? And it's not death, I'll give you that.
Heights.
It's not heights.
Yep.
The
Public
top
speaking?
list on their questionnaire, on their survey, was political corruption, government corruption, with 75% of the respondents saying they were afraid of it, which is up from 61% last year, a significant bounce. So this is something that would have greater sellability right now than it has in the past. And I can give you more of these fears, which may or may not surprise you as we go along. But you want to talk about that one?
Well, actually, I can think of a great example of what you're talking about.
Fear itself.
And not, well, there's fear itself, but what I'm thinking about is, think of September 11th, 2001. The suspense novels that were coming out pre that dealt more with serial killers, stuff like that, and so forth. After 9/11, we started getting more terrorism-focused thrillers coming out, and spy thrillers, and so forth. Not saying spy thrillers didn't focus on some of it, but that wasn't the main focus. It was like, before September 11th, I could maybe pick out one or two that might deal with some kind of terrorism aspect.
Yeah, and everything in the 80s was a Russian spy.
Right, exactly. And then after September 11th, I could, in theory, which I would never do to him, but grab Pumpkin by the tail, swing him around, and I couldn't avoid butt hitting a bunch of thrillers on dealing with terrorism or some type of terrorism.
It was around the 10-year anniversary of 9/11 when I took on the task of rewriting my book from Parts Unknown and turned it into the 5-part serial that it is. And a big element that was added in during that time was the fact that the U.S. government had subsidized this promotion that is at the heart of the story. And I wanted to really kind of play with that and see like what it is that they were doing with it. And one of the tactics that I used was the bombing of a major landmark in the U.S. Now, I didn't want to use anything from New York because that had already been done ad nauseum, and I really didn't want to kind of kick my hometown and everything over and over again. So I decided to shift something out west. So I had the first major moment being the bombing of the Golden Gate Bridge, and I realized only recently. This is like after the ebooks are out, after the paperbacks are out and everything, all of a sudden I was just like, okay, so basically like a big part of this political climate is dividing people against each other. And I just bombed the bridge in this story. What do you know? Like it was one of those things that just kind of came into mind. So yeah, government corruption really became like a real kind of growing element in that whole story. The more I was getting into it, the more I was loving it, and the more I realized that I had something there.
Brad.
So, going into this can actually be a two-way street in terms of the way fear can grow and lessen. and change and morph. So back in the 90s, if you'd asked anybody, the government had like 60 different layers to it, and there was this whole secret side of it that had been running the world, and the Kennedy assassination, and aliens, and I mean, this is all brought out in the X-Files if you really want to watch
in the movie,
all the
yeah.
craziness and stuff like that.
I was trying to do the X-Files.
Martin Landau talking about FEMA.
Exactly. I mean, but here's the messed up part of that. So since the 90s, we are now in the state where there is no way I could ever believe that our government was ever, like, you know, in a place where it could have done all of that crazy, you know, like, you know, stuff behind the curtain and stuff like that. And, you know, especially now, like, we had the Bush years that were kind of crazy, and we had the Obama years, and we've had, you know, now we're in this new administration. So, like, government has taken this whole turn of giant, secret, scary men in black to completely incompetent and totally corrupt and everything like that. And it's this giant pendulum that's swinging back and forth, and it'll go back, I'm sure. But in that, you realize that what scares one generation might actually be hilarious to the next generation. So there is something to keep an eye on a list like this of what's scary now.
There's a terrific episode of South Park that deals with the 9/11 conspiracy, which is basically the government itself trying to uphold this conspiracy theory that the government actually had something to do with 9/11. Because if that conspiracy tumbles down and people realize that so much of what happened was based on pure incompetence, then then the government itself will not be able to recover from that.
Yeah.
So that itself, you know, it just, you know, played into it wonderfully in that episode.
I could continue on this comment, but go ahead for Fedora.
How about some more of the things in the top 10
Please,
that
yeah.
Americans now are afraid of? Some of them might be just like obvious for suspense, like North Korea, for example, is in the top 10. And so are some more personal things like people not fearing that they won't have enough money to get through old age, or that they will be sick and not have health care in old age. Those were two of them. And the next 4 or 5 I thought were really interesting because pollution and those kinds of fallout things never made the top 10 until this year. And now in the top 10 we have fear of pollution of oceans, water pollution, we have air pollution, we have something else too, another kind of pollution. But there are 3 kinds of pollutions: air and water, and global warming. I was going to read my own writing. Are all in the top 10 now, and they never have been before. So that is some very fertile ground.
Well, we keep getting hit by hurricanes every other week.
Yes.
It's hard not to be like, maybe I should worry about that.
And as a part of what you're saying there, I mean, when Andrew hit in, what was that, 80s, 90s, whenever?
No,
Andrew was 91.
92, 91, something like that.
91, yeah. And it was, we can't have picture type 4 or 5 coming in and hitting us all the time. And this year, how many type 4s came across? Anyway, and I'm going to stop there. Because this show is not political. Moving on. What are some how?
Let me give you the least, though, because those
Please,
are just,
actually, also
the least scary things
Does
that
it?
were on their list
Yeah.
of 70.
Fedora,
Okay.
also too, if you would. If it says it's got a website, please share that.
A selfie.
Okay, I will. I like to look for
These
that
scary things of all time.
because, but these are the least scary things on the list. Animals, only feared by less than 4% of the population.
Okay.
Just below the percent of respondents who said they were afraid of ghosts and zombies.
Yeah, we no longer fear the zombie. It's
Well, they're, you know, everyone is so like
Overexposed.
everyone is so
Too many zombies
militant of
out
it,
there
and they know
already.
exactly how to deal with them.
Yeah.
I finished watching Shaun of the Dead, and it made me feel so much better about zombies.
I think we're almost at this point kind of hoping.
Yeah.
Well, I think the zombies live among us. Never mind. I'll get shot.
No, I don't see it.
Everybody knows.
to look
Everybody
at.
knows me.
But you could probably look at Chapman University and
That's what I'm gonna. Is it Chap?
Chapman University.
I'm gonna look it up. Go for it.
I just want to throw out a little element of something that I would say not to do. And that is when it comes when you're writing suspense everything. The one thing you don't want to do is to add suspense where it's not necessary.
Yeah.
There is a prime example of that. This is something that I've written about, like years back when I was writing for 411 Mania. But I noted a specific scene in the 1998 film Armageddon. Not a great film, but at the same time, like it plays onto some moments that that really gets you invested, especially in the first half. Second half, that's where a whole lot of it falls apart, and a big part of it is because they decided at one moment where you have characters squabbling, like with each other, you realize that things aren't really happening in terms of the drilling into the asteroid where everyone is sitting on. They decide they want to add this element where the nuke that they've been carrying with them on this asteroid is going to be detonated remotely from the U.S. And all of a sudden it creates this whole ticking clock scenario that was handled as badly as you can possibly imagine, because you have this moment where you have literally about a minute left before this giant nuke is going to blow up and really not do anything to stop this asteroid's trajectory toward Earth. And Bruce Willis decides to give a speech to to Colonel Sharp. Meanwhile, like, this clock is still like ticking. It's just like, will you just go ahead, will you turn it off or something? There's no reason why this happened. It was just like an extra element that added another 10 minutes of running time.
It killed the suspense.
It really did.
And was probably needed for a technical reason.
It was, and it became just absolutely annoying, where it just became another red wire, blue wire moment that was not necessary whatsoever. You could have literally taken that 15-minute chunk out, tossed it away, and everything would have been fine. In fact, it would have probably increased the satisfaction because it would have shortened the movie by a good 15 minutes, which it really could have used. And but yeah, one thing I definitely want to say: do not just go ahead and add it just because you feel like you need to add it. There has to be an organic reason for that suspense.
Agreed. Okay. By the way, the website, I just looked it up, is www.chapman.edu/Wilkinson, WILKINSON/research-centers/ Babby, BABBIE-center /survey
There's the suspense. We want to know when he's going to be finished.
So that was survey-american-fears.aspx.
Or just Google Chapman and Fears. It's probably going to come up.
That's how I found it. And by the way, I'm looking for it. I did see on Google you were able to see what they were by year, but on the website I'm not finding it. But I've only been on here for 5 seconds, so if there is a way to find it, it's on here, so I'll find it myself. But take a look at this. This is interesting. Thank you, Fedora, for bringing it. And with that, I'm going to say I think we've hit suspense pretty hard. There's a lot we can still cover.
Nope, I have the best piece of advice. This is what you need. It will make every story suspenseful.
Okay, so then Brad is going to close us out with our closing thought. Dun, dun, dun. The new theme songs for Right Pack Radio were written and performed by Meredith Tate. All copyrights remain with her. And tune in next week for yet another interesting topic on the writing industry. Thank you for listening.